They pick that up tomorrow.
Oh, they do?
Yeah, they've called me already. Between 8 and 3. Yeah.
Only that is probably 305. It is the county.
Okay. Good to go.
All right.
Somebody left a screwdriver back here.
Oh, the yellow one.
I picked it up downstairs.
No, this is orange and black.
Oh, the flames? It's probably,
Thompson
might be mine.
or Phillips?
Oh, we can start. Reader?
Okay.
Is it flames? Oh, no.
It's an Orthodox Jewish Phillips.
Okay, it is time for us to begin our Bible class this morning. And I'm going to ask Brother Miller, if you would, to lead us in a prayer to get us started with our class. Let's pray.
Dear Lord, our most precious Heavenly Father, we thank you for this glorious morning, for your Son, Jesus Christ. We ask you to be with us as we study your holy word. Bless us and let it come into our hearts. And bless the teacher, we ask this in Jesus' name, our Lord and Savior. Amen.
Amen. Okay, we are now in week 46 of our study of the life of Christ. And probably one of the most familiar of the miracles that Jesus performed, of course, was feeding the 5,000. And we're going to be looking at some introductory material today. This will be our study for this week, both for Sunday morning as well as for Wednesday night. Now, it's interesting that this is found in all four Gospels. Let me give you the scripture references if you haven't picked up your copy yet of the outline. It's found in Matthew chapter 14, verses 13 through 21, Mark chapter 6, verses 33 through 44. It's found in Luke chapter 9, verses 11 through 17, and then in John chapter 6, verses 2 through 14. You notice that we have not been in the Gospel of John very much, have we? His goes somewhat differently than the other Gospel accounts do. But we're going to be reading primarily from Mark's account, from Mark chapter 6, and from John's account, John chapter 6. Mark's reading helps us to appreciate the situation Jesus and his disciples found themselves when Jesus fed the 5,000. Now remember, we ended our last study with Jesus and the disciples seeking a retreat from their ministry. They had just learned of the passing or the death, we might say the murder of John the Baptist by Herod Antipas, king of Galilee. So I want us to look at Mark's account, Mark chapter 6, verses 30 through 34, because that will help introduce us into our study this morning. It's important for us to see how these events tie together leading into the feeding of the 5,000. Remember, Jesus is crossing back and forth the Sea of Galilee, sometimes just trying to find refuge. So let's take with verse 30 through 34 of Mark chapter 6.
Then the apostles gathered to Jesus and told him all things, both what they had done and what they had taught. And he said to them, "Come aside by yourselves to a deserted place and rest a while." For there were many coming and going, and they did not even have time to eat. So they departed to a deserted place in the boat by themselves. But the multitude saw them departing, and many knew him, and ran there on foot from all the cities. They arrived before them and came together to him. And Jesus, when he came out, saw a great multitude, and was moved with compassion for them, because they were like sheep not having a shepherd. So he began to teach them many things.
Okay, you may not realize this, but other than the resurrection of Christ, this is the only miracle that's recorded in all four gospel accounts, the feeding of the 5,000. And that makes this miracle very significant, especially when you consider that John's gospel only records 7 miracles, or what they're called in his gospel signs. And one of the 7 is the feeding of the 5,000. And then with the others, he didn't use the same miracles that the others reported. And it helps you to realize how significant that is when John says many other things Jesus did in the presence of his disciples, which are not recorded in this book. In fact, what you're seeing is that he's delivering to us several things, miracles, that the other gospel accounts do not give. Some have called this the creative miracle, and I kind of wondered about that. I guess it's because of what he's able to do with the loaves and the fish, be able to produce more from less. So once again, let's review the context of this miracle. This was the end of Jesus' third Galilean tour. He'll visit just briefly in the future, but his work in Galilee is pretty much done. King Herod had beheaded John the Baptist. Now Herod is interested in Jesus' work. The apostles had come back from their mission work, what we call the limited commission, and they give their reports. And Jesus proposed to go to the east side of the sea, as we read in Luke chapter 9 and verse 10. But what happens next is amazing. We usually concentrate our discussions upon the miracle itself. It is fascinating to see what Jesus was able to do with so little, with so many people on this occasion. However, instead of concentrating on that, let's concentrate on the heart of the Savior. Because really, that's what we are supposed to imitate. We can't do the miracles, but we are to imitate him. Something we need to focus on is how Jesus helped people. We should not forget that we have a responsibility to help others as well. For instance, we read in Galatians chapter 6 and verse 10, and I'm going to read 2 passages, and we're going to come back and at least look at one of these in more detail this morning. But in Galatians chapter 6 and verse 10 we read, "Therefore, as we have opportunity, let us do good to all, and especially to those who are of the household of the faith." If you'd like to, even as I'm speaking, and I said we'd be coming back to this in a few minutes, ask yourself the question, why is therefore there in verse 10? And then you'll be going back and looking at the previous text and see how what he says earlier follows with this right now. So give that some thought. Another passage is found in James 1 and verse 27. "Pure and undefiled religion before God and the Father is this, to visit orphans and widows in their trouble and keep oneself unspotted from the world." So again, we see that there is responsibility. And then in 1 John 3 and verse 17, really focusing on brethren, it says, "But whoever has this world's goods and sees his brother in need and shut up his heart from him, how does the love of God abide in him?" Shut up his heart, it says. The old King James, I believe, is the bowels of compassion. And I've mentioned to you before the significance of that word. The word is skalagna. and it has to do with one's guts. It's a sinking feeling in your gut. When you see somebody that's really hurting and needing help, and you can't be moved by that. But what are we seeing with Jesus when it comes to the feeding of the 5,000? That's what we're about to read in just a moment. So I want us now to read from John chapter 6, verses 2 through 14. John 6, 2 through 14.
Then a great multitude followed him, because they saw his signs, which he performed on those who were deceased. And Jesus went up on the mountain, and there he sat with his disciples. Oh, I said diseased. Now the Passover, the feast of the Jews, was near. Then Jesus lifted up his eyes, and seeing a great multitude coming toward him, he said to Philip, "Where shall we buy bread that these may eat?" But this he said to test him, for he himself knew what he would do. Philip answered him, 200 denarii worth of bread is not sufficient for them, that every one of them may have a little. One of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, said to him, "There is a lad here who has 5 barley loaves and 2 small fish, but what are they among so many?" Then Jesus said, "Make the people sit down." Now there was much grass in the place, so the men sat down, in number about 5,000. And Jesus took the loaves, and when he had given thanks, he distributed them to the disciples, and the disciples to those who were sitting down, and likewise of the fish, as much as they wanted. So when they were filled, he said to the disciples, "Gather up the fragments that remain, so that nothing is lost." Therefore they gathered them up and filled 12 baskets with the fragments of the 5 barley loaves, which were left over by those who had eaten. Then those men, when they had seen the sign that Jesus did, said, "This is truly the prophet who has come into the world."
Okay, so here we just read John's account of the feeding of the 5,000. And we saw already just before that in Mark's gospel, in Mark chapter 6 and verse 34, it says, "And Jesus, when he came out and saw the great multitude, was moved with compassion." And we're told why he had compassion. Because they were like sheep not having a shepherd. So he began to teach them many things. So we're looking at a very compassionate Lord here. And that compassion is going to follow through with recognizing the needs of these people. They've been with him all day long. And we're finding out that they are now in a deserted place away from town and so on, and they haven't had anything to eat. And Jesus is very aware of that. When we're thinking about compassion, we have to use good sense in regard to that. We need to remember, first of all, that people do have needs, and those needs need to be met. There are some who should not be helped. Who and why? Furthermore, how can we know who we should help and those who we should not help? One of those principles is certainly found in the book of 2 Thessalonians 3 and verse 10. Which tells us, "For even when we were with you, we commanded you this, if anyone will not work, neither shall he eat." Of course, we are to understand these are the people who are capable of working. They're not crippled or sick where they cannot work. And so we have the responsibility to work. If we do not work, we do not eat. That's one of the things that has been kind of disturbing in the direction of this country. People are being fed who refuse to work. Now people don't want to work, and we've got that problem. But what really amazes me about these followers of Jesus is that they are so glued to Jesus and mesmerized by Jesus' words, that they are now in a deserted place and they're not even aware of where they are. And really, they don't care. But hunger is going to come upon them. And Jesus knows that, so he's looking out for them. Note that in our reading in Mark chapter 6, that people ran to Jesus in order to greet him. I suggest that we now continue with our reading from Mark chapter 6. And this is going to be, we've just read through verse 34. Let's read through 35 through 44 of Mark chapter 6.
When the day was now far spent, the disciples came to him and said, "This is a deserted place, and already the hour is late. Send them away that they may go into the surrounding country and villages and buy themselves bread, for they have nothing to eat." But he answered and said to them, "Give them something to eat." And they said to him, "Shall we go and buy 200 denarii worth of bread and give them something to eat?" But he said to them, "How many loaves do you have? Go and see." And when they found out, they said, 5 and 2 fish. Then he commanded them to make them sit down in groups on the green grass. So they sat down in ranks, in hundreds and in 50s. And when he had taken the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, he looked up to heaven, blessed and broke the loaves, and gave them to the disciples to set before them. And the 2 fish he divided among them all. So they all ate and were filled. And then they took 12 baskets full of fragments and of the fish. Now those who had eaten the loaves were about 5,000 men.
Okay, so it's interesting to see the attitude of the disciples and that of Jesus. You know, what was their suggestion that Jesus should do with the multitude? Yeah, send them away, right? And let them take care of themselves. And Jesus is not sending them away. What does he say to them?
You give them something.
You feed them. And of course, he's helping them to realize that they're going to have to depend upon him. What is the purpose of this miracle? If you're familiar with the rest of, say, John chapter 6. That's right. Thank you, Steve. I appreciate that. It is to show that he is the bread of life. This is an object lesson for them. He is going to do for them what they could not do for themselves. And you know, that's the way life is for all of us. We like to take great pride of what we can do. And of course, whatever we can do, we ought to do. But we do not survive without Christ. He's actually holding the universe together when you get into the book of Colossians. And so he's bringing this lesson home to them. People ran to meet them. How did Jesus receive the crowd? Very good. He welcomed them with, that was the word I was looking for, Brother Miller. He welcomed them with compassion. They had physical needs. So Jesus had been healing the sick. Now he's going to feed the people. They had spiritual needs. What has he been doing all day? Teaching them. Do people still have needs today?
Oh, yes.
Yes.
Physical as well as spiritual.
Yes. Let's look at a few passages that bring these out to us this morning. First of all, we have spiritual needs, and I don't know. I didn't give you a list of scriptures. Do you have a pen and paper there? I'll give you several here that you can have prepared. The first one we're going to be looking at is Matthew 16:26. And then we're going to be looking at James chapter 2, 14 through 17. we're going to return to James 1:27. We're going to be looking at Matthew 25, verses 34 through 36. And then we're going to Romans 12, verse 15. What's it? It was Matthew 25, 34 through 36, and then Romans 12 to 15. And then Galatians 6:10, we're going to revisit that. And finally, 1 Thessalonians 5, 14 and 15. We need to be able to see Christ in ourselves. Again, we could spend quite a bit of time, proving Jesus' deity and all that, and the wonders of this miracle. But we're really seeing the heart of Jesus. And these passages stress to us the kind of people that we ought to be. So what kind of needs do we have? First of all, we have spiritual needs. That's Matthew 16 and verse 26.
Peter said to him, "From strangers." Jesus said to him, "Then the sons are free." Am I in the right place? No, hang on. The page is stuck together. That does not make sense. Hang on 1 second.
You got one of the New Pew
I
Bibles?
was like, hold on. Okay.
Man, I got to wet
I was
my
like, that
fingers
doesn't
all
make
the
any
time to
sense.
separate those pages. Yeah.
Okay. Let's try that again. 16:26, not 17. For what profit is it to a man if he gains the whole world and loses his own soul? Or what will a man give in exchange for his soul?
Wow. That's probably the number one need, isn't it? And we're going to look next at James chapter 2, beginning with verse 14. And we're going to be looking at food and clothing. We certainly have need for food and clothing. Again, James chapter 4. And notice how James instructs his instruction on faith and works is tied together in this.
What does it profit, my brethren, if someone says he has faith but does not have works? Can faith save him?
Go ahead to verse 7.
If a brother or sister is naked and destitute of daily food, and one of you says to them, "Depart in peace, be warmed and filled," but you do not give them the things that are needed for the body, what does it profit? Thus also faith by itself, if it does not have works, is dead.
Okay. So it's going right into this area, isn't it? We're talking about people needing food, being able to take care of the hungry. And then we're going to go back to the previous chapter, chapter 1, and verse 27, where there are needs among widows and orphans.
Pure and undefiled religion before God and the Father is this: to visit orphans and widows in their trouble, and to keep oneself unspotted from the world.
Let me ask you this question. What do you think the word visit means?
Meet their needs.
Yes. You see, it's just not to go see them, tell them who you are, and hope things get better for you. I'm visiting you today.
To see what you need.
Yeah, and not only what the needs are, but what?
But how to take care of them.
How to take care of those needs. That's really what visit means here. And you can see the problems that they have. They have trouble. What kind of trouble would they have?
Lack of food. Defenseless.
Okay, defenseless. What kind of trouble do you think orphans have?
They have nobody to care for.
That's right. They don't have parental care and guidance, do they?
Their basic needs aren't being met.
And their basic needs. And so they need more than just basic needs, don't they? As far as food and clothing.
But they also need emotional and
Absolutely.
They don't have.
And they need parental care.
Right, precisely. Loving parental care.
That's right. And look at Matthew chapter 25, verses 34 through 36. Here we read about the sick, and we're coming across the same idea here. We're finding that just visiting the sick, that is helping those who are in need of help during their difficult ordeal, does make a difference. Let's read verses 34 through 36.
What chapter?
This is Matthew chapter 25.
Then the king will say to those on his right hand, "Come, you blessed of my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me drink. I was a stranger, and you took me in. I was naked, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you visited me. I was in prison, and you came to me."
Okay. Now, in this particular case, of talking about I was sick and you visited me, what could that involve?
Probably taking care of needs.
Well, how would that be? How would that be interpreted? To take.
Staying with them.
Okay.
To try and get them back to their house.
And encouraging.
All right. Very good. Encouraging. Sometimes people you have to sit with sick people. They can't even feed themselves. There have been times, of course, when people are so sick and they can't even pay for medical care. Somebody might have to help with that. Yes, Sister Anderson. That's excellent. Yes, the Good Samaritan is an excellent illustration of that. He not only took that man to an inn, but what else did he do?
He paid for him.
Whatever he needed. And he told the innkeeper, whatever else he needs, put on my bill.
And I will take care of it on my way there.
When I come back, I'll take care of it. That's really what Jesus is looking for here. Yes, Brother Bergstrom.
For the prison portion, I always immediately jump to the idea of criminals. But I just realized, well, what about Christians who are being persecuted for being Christians who are in prison?
That's
They need the
right.
encouragement.
They had done nothing wrong. They don't belong in prison, but they're there. How do you think that makes them feel?
Tears them down.
Who do we just study about? John the Baptist. He hadn't done anything wrong.
But I was even thinking of being in prison. What about the shut-in who can't go anywhere
That's right.
because they're crippled? They are in their prison, not necessarily, cells and bars and all that, but there are people who are actually in their own prison.
And they may need help to get to the doctor.
Exactly, or to the grocery store.
Yep. Had another comment here, and I can't remember it now. When you get older, it gets like that, But gotta write it down. Absolutely. So here you have people being taken care of because they're sick. I think the thing I wanted to mention to you before was what Brother Bergstrom was talking about, those who are in prison. What happened to John the Baptist while he was in prison?
He was visited.
Huh?
Well, he was visited by his disciples.
Yeah, well, but what happened to him?
Well, yeah.
Before he was beheaded, while he was in prison.
He was kind of concerned about Jesus too. Well, he was out a little bit for a while.
That's right. You know what? A person that's in prison unjustly, there are doubts that come into their mind. What did John send his disciples to Jesus to ask about? Are you the one? Or are we to look for another? Now, why would John ask a question like that?
Because his brother and other things from prison, from other inmates, and probably from the guards.
If you were John and you hadn't done anything wrong and you found yourself in prison, what's the first question you'd ask?
Why?
Yeah, why? Why am I here? And what John is asking is, what happened to God's plan? He has his doubts as to this is the way it's supposed to be. You know, sometimes when you try to do right and what comes out is wrong, you wonder, well, am I on the right path? And you could very well be on the right path. You may be being tried for what you're you're enduring. And then what about the bereaved? This is from Romans 12 and verse 15. This would be the next one that we want to consider.
Rejoice with those who rejoice, and weep with those who weep.
Now notice that all these obligations are both of the individual and of the church to do. That's what makes us a community of God's people. We as a church weep with those who are suffering, who are weeping. We just don't do it individually. There's strength in numbers. But there is also a danger in this. In the minds of some Christians, when they do not know that the church is assisting in these matters, or they do know it, they lose for themselves a sense of personal responsibility. It's sort of like out of sight, out of mind, yes.
I was thinking more like, oh, someone else will do it.
That's exactly what, in fact, we'll go over the works of the church, and we're helping orphans, or helping widows, or helping the needy, maybe even in other countries, and okay, I'll write a check and I'll put it in the collection. And we have no more involvement in that at all.
And that's the easy way of doing it anyway. Than being actually physically and emotionally involved with someone else.
That's where the compassion comes in, to be emotionally involved in it. So we want to check it out.
Brother Job,
Yes.
one of the more powerful lessons I had as an opportunity for the kids is I remember when I was my most busy here, working, et cetera, Abby was probably 10 or 11, and I said, I need to go to the church building and do some work. And she asked, well, why does it have to be you? Why can't someone else do it? And I said, honey, if I say, why can't someone else do it, everyone else is going to be in the same mindset. You need to be first and foremost in work.
And nobody does it then.
Yeah.
And that happens so often.
Even happens on the job, what you do.
Why do you think it's so important for us to be involved in this?
Because it keeps us humble and also keeps us thinking about others and always helping them and not being selfish and me
Yeah,
self-reliant.
you're getting right on it.
Well, then you have
We
a
need to be really involved.
Because then you have a personal interest.
Okay.
It's right there. It's right. We read it in James already.
Mm-hmm.
Without those works, it's a dead faith.
That's right.
Brother Joe,
Yes.
we're not involved in other people's lives. We have a say as the section of the world.
Mhm.
But they are not involved in other people's lives. We as Christians are to be involved in other people's lives as Christ was involved in other people's lives.
You know, we can all probably quote what Paul wrote concerning what Jesus said. It's more blessed to give than to receive. Acts 20 and verse 35. Why is it more blessed to give than to receive?
Because you're growing spiritually. Because in a way, you become more and more like your Heavenly Father. You give to everyone regardless. You're being more like Jesus, who gave his life.
I'm going to put the emphasis on the word blessed.
Bless the word.
Why is it more blessed to give than to receive.
The more you give, the more you're being blessed.
No.
That's the way we think. But we are giving, it's more blessed to give than to receive.
God's blessing us when we give from the heart. And God is
When you give, you reflect upon your own blessings. You see? It makes better people out of us. We're instead of being self-centered on ourselves, what we want, how we feel, we've turned our attention on others who are unfortunate, and then we look at ourselves and said, you know, I'm really blessed. Isn't it wonderful that I can do something like this? Instead of being on the receiving part of the equation. And so what kind of people does that make us?
Better.
In what way? We say, well, make us better people. These are pretty generic. In what way are we better?
because we're living a life that God in Christ wants to live by being his follower. As he gave, so should we give.
Well, I see somebody out here who's hungry, and I give them something to eat. It's more blessed to give than to receive. How does that translate?
Well, actually, I think it makes you feel better to feed somebody else and giving from your heart to feed that person. You know, and you've done something for somebody who has less than you.
Well, I mean, that could be, you could pay for that by taxes that are required of you. The government's going to come in and say, we're going to take some of your money and we're going to give it to somebody else. Are you blessed by that?
No.
So how is it it's more blessed to give than to receive when you're talking about helping somebody who is hungry? How is it that you are blessed? Don't you have less food yourself? Don't you keep a ledger of your expenses and so on? Oh, I've just decreased in wealth here. That's a blessing.
Now, you look at that way, you're looking at it from a very self-centered viewpoint.
So how is it more?
When you give from the heart,
When you put other people.
that's where you get your blessing.
That's how.
That's what we say, but how is that true? We know that's what we're supposed to say, but how is it true?
Well, it's also like we're being a good steward of the money that we have, of God's, of God's blessings anyway. Like if we have all of these blessings of our own and we could be a good steward of them, like to pass them along and be generous with other people.
You want to be able to say, I've been so blessed that I'm able to help those who are less fortunate. And that comes back as a blessing to me because I realize how good God has really been to me. So how does that affect my disposition?
Makes your disposition better, much better.
You have people in this world that are incredibly rich in material things. And what are they doing? They're griping and complaining.
Right. They're not demonstrating the blessings that God has bestowed upon them.
That's right, they're not.
I know that's for my job, but I see people pull into some of my events in Cadillacs and Porsches and Audis, and they don't donate dime one, but someone who will come in and beat up Nissan Sentra will buy an exceedingly amount of backpacks
Okay, let's take a look at Galatians 6. I said we're going to come back to this. I'm going to invite you all to turn to that. I wanted to get to this before we ended this morning's class. Galatians 6, we read from verse 10 before. Let's read verse 10.
Therefore, as we have opportunity, let us do good to all, especially those who are of the household of faith.
Why is therefore there?
It's a conclusion of arguments.
Okay, what's the argument?
It starts back at verse 7. Do not be deceived. God cannot be mocked. A man will reap what he sows. But one sows in the flesh, from it he will reap corruption and destruction. Whoever sows in the spirit, he will reap eternal life. Let us not lose heart and grow weary in doing right. At the proper time, we will reap if we do not lose heart.
I suggest you go back before that. Yes, go back to verse 1. If a man is overtaken in any trespass, you who are spiritual, restore such a one in a spirit of gentleness, considering yourself, lest you also be tempted. Bear one another's burdens, and so fulfill the law of Christ. If anyone thinks himself something. When you look at the context of this, what is this? Does anybody have an idea what he's going back to earlier in this book? Maybe just the previous chapter? By the way, when it says, therefore, as we have opportunity, it means really while we have the opportunity. Well, now, while we have the opportunity, let us do good to all. The word good is the Greek word agathos, and it refers to moral and spiritual excellence within the individual. And where does that come from?
God.
From the heart.
I said, look at it from the context. And I already given you a clue that the context takes you back to the previous chapter.
Verse 16.
The Spirit.
It's the fruit of the Spirit. Notice what we have in chapter 5. Verses 22 and 23. But the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, long-suffering, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. Against such there is no law. See, this is an opportunity for God's Spirit to produce His precious fruit in our hearts. And that's why it's more blessed to give than to receive. That's why whenever we have opportunity, let us do good to all men, and especially of the household of the faith. It really defines who we are. Well, we're not going to get to 1 Thessalonians 5, 14 and 15, but I'll let you read that for yourself. Our time is gone this morning, and it's so good for us to be here. And thank you so much for your kind attention and your participation.
You know, I